Chapter 12. The Object of Desire. Prostitution. The erotic object. I have discussed the Christian position with regard to sacred eroticism and the orgy. I have described the latest stage in which eroticism has become sin and has been hard put to it to survive in a world of freedom whence sin has vanished. I must now go back beyond this stage. The orgy was not the furthest point reached by eroticism in the pagan world. The orgy is the sacred aspect of eroticism in which the continuity of beings beyond solitude is most plainly expressed. Only in one way, however. In the orgy, continuity cannot be laid hold of. Individuals lose themselves at the climax, but in mingled confusion. The orgy is necessarily disappointing. Theoretically, it is the complete negation of the individual quality. It presupposes, it even demands equality among the participants. Not only is individuality itself submerged in the tumult of the orgy, but each participant denies the individuality of the others. All limits are completely done away with, or so it seems. But it is impossible for nothing to remain of the differences between individuals and the sexual attraction connected with those differences. The final aim of eroticism is fusion, all barriers gone, but its first stirrings are characterized by the presence of a desirable object. In the orgy, this object does not stand out by itself, for sexual excitement occurs through an uncontrolled urge, the opposite of habitual reserve. But everybody has this urge. It is objective, but it is not perceived as an object. The person who perceives it is at the same time animated by it. On the other hand, excitement is normally roused by something distinct and objective. In the animal kingdom, the odour of the female often sets the male after her. The songs of displays of birds bring into play other kinds of perception that tell the female that the male is near and the sexual shock is at hand. Smell, hearing, sight, even taste are objective signals distinct from the activity they incite. They are signals to announce the crisis. In a world of man, these messages have an intense erotic value. A pretty girl stripped naked is sometimes an erotic symbol. The object of desire is different from eroticism itself. It is not eroticism in its completeness, but eroticism working through it. Even in the animal world, these outward signs make the differences between individuals perceptible. In our own world, beyond the orgy, they make the differences obvious, and as individuals are unequally equipped with them according to their talents, state of mind, and wealth, they stress the difference. The development of these signs has the following consequence. Eroticism, which is a fusion, which shifts interest away from and beyond the person and his limits, is nevertheless expressed by an object. We are faced with the paradox of an object which implies the abolition of the limits of all objects, of an erotic object. Woman, the privileged objects of desire. Theoretically, a man may be just as much the object of a woman's desire as a woman is of a man's desire. The first step towards sexual intercourse, however, is usually the pursuit of a woman by a man. Men have the initiative, and women have the power of exciting desire in men. It would be quite wrong to say that women are more beautiful or even more desirable than men, but with their passive attitude, they try by exciting desire to bring about the conjunction that men achieve by pursuing them. They are no more desirable, but they lay themselves open to be desired. They put themselves forward as objects for the aggressive desire of men. Not every woman is a potential prostitute, but prostitution is the logical consequence of the feminine attitude. Insofar as she is attractive, a woman is a prey to men's desire. Unless she refuses completely because she is determined to remain chaste, the question is at what price and under what circumstances will she yield? But if the conditions are fulfilled, she always offers herself as an object. Prostitution proper only brings in a commercial element. By the care she lavishes on her toilet, by the concern she has for her beauty set off by her adornment, A woman regards herself as an object, always trying to attract men's attention. Similarly, if she strips naked, she reveals the object of a man's desire, an individual and particular object to be prized. Nakedness, as opposed to the normal state, is certainly a kind of negation. The naked woman is near the moment of fusion. Her nakedness heralds it. But although she symbolizes the contrary, the negation of the object, she herself is still an object. Hers is the nakedness of a limited being, even if it proclaims the imminence of her pride's surrender in the tumultuous confusion of the sexual spasm. The potential beauty of this nakedness and its individual charm are what reveal themselves in the first place, the objective difference, in fact, between the value of one object and that of another. Religious prostitution. More often than not, the object inciting male pursuit eludes it. That means not that the suggestion has not been made, but that the necessary conditions are not fulfilled. Even if they are, the first refusal, which seems to deny the offer already made, only enhances its value. This elusiveness is logically bound up with modesty. The object of desire could not answer male expectations. She could not invite pursuit, and especially preference, if, far from retreating, she did not make herself conspicuous by her expression or her dress. Putting oneself forward is the fundamental feminine attitude, but that first movement is followed by a feigned denial. Only prostitution has made it possible for adornment to stress the erotic value of the object. Such adornment really runs counter to the second movement, when a woman evades the attack. What happens is that the use of adornment implies that the wearer is a prostitute, or a pretense of evasion then sharpens desire. To begin with, prostitution is in harmony with this process. Feminine attitudes are made up of complementary opposites. The prostitution of some requires that others shall be elusive, and vice versa. But this interaction is spoiled by poverty. Prostitution is an open sore as soon as poverty alone puts a stop to the movement. Certain women, it is true, never react by flight. They offer themselves unreservedly and accept or even solicit the gifts without which they would find it hard to show that they were available for men's pursuit. Prostitution is simply a consecration in the first place. Certain women become objects in marriage. They are instruments of domestic work, of agriculture particularly. Prostitution made them into objects of masculine desire, objects which at any rate heralded the moment when in the close embrace nothing remained but only a convulsive continuity. When the commercial aspect of modern prostitution gained the upper hand, this aspect was overshadowed. But if the prostitute received sums of money or precious articles, these were originally gifts which she would use for extravagant expenditure and ornaments that made her more desirable. Thus she increased the power she had had from the first to attract gifts from the richest men. This exchange of gifts was not a commercial transaction. What a woman can give outside marriage cannot be put to any productive use, and similarly with the gifts that dedicate her to the luxurious life of eroticism. This sort of exchange led to all sorts of extravagance rather than to the regularity of commerce. Desire was a fiery thing. It could burn up a man's wealth to the last penny. It could burn out the life of a man in whom it was aroused. Prostitution seems to have been simply a complement to marriage in the first place, a transitional step. The transgression in the marriage ceremony led to an organised daily life, and labour could be shared between husband and wife. A transgression of this sort was no way of consecrating anyone to erotic life. Sexual relations continued overtly, and the transgression that initiated them was not stressed after the first contact. With prostitution, the prostitute was dedicated to the life of transgression. The sacred or forbidden aspect of sexual activity remained apparent in her, for her whole life was dedicated to violating the taboo. We must look for this vocation before the deeds and the words describing this vocation. We must see the ancient institution of sacred prostitution in this light. In any case, in a world before, or outside, Christianity, Religion, far from opposing prostitution, was able to control its modalities as it could with other sorts of transgression. The prostitutes in contact with sacred things, in surroundings themselves sacred, had a sacredness comparable with that of priests. Compared with modern prostitution, religious prostitution seems devoid of shame, but the difference is misleading. Surely it was in that she had retained, if not a feeling of shame, at least its simulacrum, that the temple courtesan avoided the disgrace of the street whore of today. The modern prostitute is proud of the shame she is bogged down in and wallows in it cynically. The anguish without which shame cannot be felt is foreign to her. The courtesan had a certain reserve. She was not an object of scorn and was not so different from other women. Her personal modesty must have had some of the shine rubbed off it, but she maintained the principle of the first contact, which requires that a woman shall be afraid of surrendering, and a man shall expect the woman to try to escape. In the orgy, fusion let loose abolished shame. Shame could be found in the consummation of marriage, but it disappeared with habit. In sacred prostitution, it became a ritual matter and came to imply transgression. A man cannot usually feel that a law is violated in his own person, and that is why he expects a woman to feel confused, even if she only pretends to do so. Otherwise he would be unaware of any violation. Shame, real or pretended, is a woman's way of accepting the taboo that makes a human being out of her. The time comes when she must break the taboo, but then she has to signify by being ashamed that the taboo is not forgotten, that the infringement takes place in spite of the taboo, in full consciousness of the taboo. Shame only disappears entirely in the lowest form of prostitution. We must not forget, however, that outside of Christianity, the religious and sacred nature of eroticism is shown in the full light of day, sacredness dominating shame. The temples of India still abound in erotic pictures carved in stone, in which eroticism is seen for what it is, fundamentally divine. Numerous Indian temples solemnly remind us of the obscenity buried deep in our hearts. Low prostitution. It is not really payment that disgraces the prostitute. Payment could well be involved in the round of ceremonial exchanges without the degradation of a commercial exchange. In the earliest societies, the gift of her body that the wife makes to her husband, the presentation of sexual service, may itself be the occasion of a gift in return. But the low prostitute, because she has become a stranger to the taboo without which we should not be human beings, falls to the level of the beasts. She generally excites a disgust like the one most civilizations claim to feel for sows. The rise of low prostitution is apparently connected with the appearance of poverty-stricken classes whose unhappy plight absolved them from the need unscrupulously to observe the taboos. I am not thinking of the working class of today, but of Marx's lumpen proletariat. Extreme poverty releases men from the taboos that make human beings of them, not as transgression does, but in that a sort of hopelessness, not absolute perhaps, gives the animal impulses free rein. Hopelessness is not a return to animal nature. The world of transgression, which swallowed up humanity as a whole, is essentially different from the animal world. And so is the restricted world of hopelessness. People who live side by side with taboos, with the sacred, and accept them in the profane world where they live their struggling lives have nothing animal about them, although others may often deny that they are human. They are in fact lower than the dignity of animals. The various objects of taboo evoke neither horror nor nausea in them, or too little at any rate. But without feeling them intensely themselves, they know what other people's reactions are. The person who says that a dying man is going to snuff it sees that man as dying like a dog, but he is aware of the hopeless degradation his coarse words imply. The coarse expressions describing the organs, products, or acts of sex are degrading in the same way. These words are prohibited. There is a general taboo upon naming those organs. To name them in a shameless manner is to step from transgression to the indifference that puts the most sacred on the same footing as the profane. The lowest kind of prostitute has fallen as far as she can go. She might be no less indifferent to the taboo than animals are, except that because what she knows about taboos is that others observe them, she cannot attain an absolute indifference. Not only has she fallen, but she knows she has. She knows she is a human being, even if she is not ashamed of it. She does know that she lives like a pig. Conversely, common prostitution as an institution complements the world of Christianity. Christianity has created a sacred world from which everything horrible or impure has been excluded. In its turn, low prostitution has created the contemporary profane world where men have slumped into hopeless indifference before the unclean, and from which the lucid precision of the working world has been shut out. It is difficult to distinguish the workings of Christianity from the much vaster process exploited and given a coherent form by Christianity. I referred to the world of transgression, and I said that one of its most obvious characteristics was its alliance with animal nature. The confusion of animal with human and animal with divine is the mark of very early humanity, and it persists with hunting peoples at least. But the substitution of human deities for animal ones came before Christianity. There was a slow progression of ideas rather than a revolution. Looked at as a whole, the transition from a purely religious society, and I connect the principle of transgression with the state of society, to the times when morality gradually established itself and gained predominance, is a very difficult problem. It varies from country to country in the civilized world, and the victory of morality and the sovereignty of taboos were not everywhere as clear-cut as with Christianity. Nevertheless, I think there is a perceptible link between the importance of morality and contempt for animals. Contempt implies that man thinks he has a moral value that animals do not possess, and which raises him far above them. Insofar as God made man in his own image, man had a monopoly of morality as opposed to inferior creatures, and the attributes of deity vanished for the animal kingdom. Only the devil remained part beast, and his tail is the sign first of transgression, and then of degradation, of a hopelessness that is the counterweight of the affirmation of the good and the duties imposed by the good. Degradation would call forth moral indignation more readily and more wholeheartedly, of course. It is quite indefensible, whereas transgression is not. In any case, Christianity's condemnation of degradation has always been responsible for the attitude that the whole of eroticism is something evil. The devil was a rebellious angel at the start, but the gaudy colours of revolt wore thin. Rebellion was punished by despair, and what had been transgression turned into hopelessness. The anguish of transgression promised transcendental joy, but despair could only become more despairing. What had these fallen creatures left to hope for? They could only wallow like pigs in their own degradation. Yes, like pigs. In this Christian world where morality and degradation are interdependent, animals are now disgusting. This Christian world. For Christianity is morality pushed to its logical conclusion, the only form of morality in which the balance of potentialities could be achieved. Eroticism, evil, and social degradation. The social basis of low prostitution is the same as that of morality and Christianity. It seems that social inequality and poverty, already the cause of one revolution in Egypt, were at the root of a disturbance in civilized countries about 6 centuries before our own era. The rise of the Hebrew prophets, among other movements, can be related to this disturbance, seen in the light of degraded prostitution, which can justifiably be assumed to have originated at this period in the Greco-Roman world. The coincidence is ironic. The class of social outcasts almost certainly had no share in their desire to exalt the lowly and cast down the mighty from their seats. At the very bottom of the social ladder they had no aims at all. The morality which exalted the lowly only served to oppress them further. The church's curse fell most heavy upon those who were already down. The religious side of eroticism was the one that mattered most to the church, the one that called forth her full wrath. Witches were burnt, low-class prostitutes allowed to live. But the degradation of prostitution was stressed and used to illustrate the nature of sin. The present situation results from the dual attitude of the church and its corollary, the dual attitude in men's minds. When the sacred and the good were held to be identical, when religious eroticism was set outside the pale, the rational denial of evil was the rejoinder. Then followed a world in which condemned transgression meant nothing, and profanation itself almost lost its force. The only remaining escape valve was hopeless degradation. Falling from grace was a dead end for the fallen, but degraded eroticism was a sort of incitement without satanic quality. For no one believed in a devil now, and even to condemn eroticism as such was meaningless. Degradation at least continued to signify evil, though no longer an evil denounced by other people, none too sure that they did in fact condemn it. Prostitutes fall as low as they do because they acquiesce in their own sordid condition. That may happen involuntarily, but the use of coarse language looks like a conscious decision. It is a way of spurning human dignity. Human life is the good, and so the acceptance of degradation is a way of spitting upon the good, a way of spitting upon human dignity. The sexual organs and the sexual act in particular are referred to by degrading names from the jargon of the dregs of society. Those organs and acts have other names, but some are scientific and others, more rarely used and shortly lived, belong to childhood or the shyness of lovers. The dirty words for love are closely and irrevocably associated with that secret life we lead concurrently with our profession of the loftiest sentiments. These unnameable names formulate the general horror for us. In fact, if we do not belong to the degraded class, they express it with violence. They are themselves violently rejected from the world of decency. No communication is conceivable between the two worlds. The effects of this are useless to the world of the fallen by itself. Dirty language is an expression of hatred, but it gives decent lovers the same kind of feeling as transgression or profanation used to do. The decent woman saying to the man in her arms, "I love your," might echo Baudelaire. The unique supreme pleasure of love lies in the certainty of doing wrong. But she already knows that eroticism is not wrong in itself. Evil is the only evil. Evil is only evil when it leads to the abject condition of the thieving rabble and the lowest type of prostitute. This woman has nothing in common with such people, and she detests their moral turpitude. She agrees that the organ named is not disgraceful in itself, but from the folk who range themselves hideously on the side of evil, she borrows the word that reveals the truth at last, that the member she loves is accursed, that she only knows it for what it is insofar as it fills her with horror, yet that the horror is revealed even as she transcends it. She wishes to side with the free thinkers, but rather than lose the sense of the elementary taboo without which eroticism cannot exist, she turns to those who deny all taboos, all shame, and who can only maintain the denial through violence.